Tonight, we're going to continue our Dogman encounters of the western United States. I know many of you are looking for it, and there's quite some eerie, hair-raising encounters. So get yourself ready. This is 10 Dogman encounters of the western United States, Part 2. Story 1. Lynn County, Oregon. March 2017. It was 2:30 a.m. and another night of not being able to sleep due to back pain. I was lying on my side reading when my very close by neighbor's motion detector lights turned on. This happened from time to time, and when it turns on, it lights up the entire side of my house. We have lived here for 9 years, and I have never once seen anything walk past my bedroom window at night. Since I was facing my large bedroom window, the very bright motion detector light going off caught my attention. I looked up and saw the side of a silhouette of a dogman. I said, "Holy crap!" It was walking past my bedroom window. I saw it from mid-shoulder up. The shoulders were huge and its head was humongous. It had pointed ears just like a German Shepherd dog and a very long snout. Its mouth was slightly open as I saw a large tongue that seemed to be lolling to the side of its mouth. When I saw this creature and spoke those words, I swear that thing slowed down, smirked, and then kept going. That's all I saw that night. Last week though, while in my bedroom again, I heard something huge land on the ground behind my bedroom wall. That wall has no windows. I heard a really, really deep kind of raspy breathing. I just started praying, pleading the blood of Jesus over my house, grounds around it and all. I do this most nights, but sometimes I forget. I'm awake most nights until 3 a.m. or later, due to having severe spinal issues, as well as fibromyalgia. We live in a lovely manufactured home community. There are lots of trees around here, and it's very close to canals, large open fields, and a lot of woods. I know this is what I saw, but the fact that I saw it has left me amazed. Why is it that when so many are also seeing them? I guess I just thought since I am in the house most of the time, due to my health, I would never see them. The space between my neighbor's house and ours is about 10 feet. My husband went outside weeks later, once I got the courage to tell him this had happened, and measured the area by the window. That dogman had to be at least 8 feet tall. What concerns me greatly is that no one in the police department or government will alert people to their existence. People are walking around feeling a false sense of security. I know I did. I won't even try to walk outside anymore, and yes, I have cautioned my neighbors, the ones with the security light. I can't think of any other details right now, but it's important for you to know that several years ago, a homeless woman was camping out down by the river here in Albany. She was found dead and her tent was really torn up. I believe the police report in the newspaper said she was torn up as well, but I honestly can't remember any of the details to be specific. To the best of my knowledge, no one was ever caught for that crime. This is a sleepy town, just well over 50,000 people. We no longer get the newspaper, so I have no idea if this happened again. I do know that a couple was down by that same area and saw a dogman. It really frightened them badly. I heard about that on another YouTube channel. I just want people to be aware so they don't go out at night anymore, especially near the river. But then, we're not near a river and I saw one in the middle of the night. Thank you for reading this report and doing all that you do. Story 2. I saw it in Oklahoma. Back in the early 90s, when I was 19 or so, I worked nights unloading trucks at a chain retail department store, back before they turned all into superstores. Anyway, several people started to notice that a coworker looked like she wasn't getting any sleep. One night, she told us a few on our break that she was having to leave early and take the long way to work and back home because of something she had seen. She previously always took a road called Moccasin Trail, but one night, the week before, while turning onto that road on her way to work, she said she saw a huge werewolf sitting in the grass, just watching cars go by. She said she had seen it on 4 or 5 occasions and just couldn't take it anymore. She said she was scared this thing was going to follow her, so she just completely avoided that road altogether. The way she described the sighting was when she would turn onto this road. Her headlights would light up the embankment across the road just enough so that she could see this big werewolf sitting about 30 feet up on the embankment. She said it would sit in the grass with its legs stretched out in front of itself. She said it would most often be leaning back, supporting itself on one or both of its elbows, in a kind of leisurely pose, just watching the cars pass by. She really seemed to be sincerely disturbed by her encounter. Over the years, I have heard several stories about strange happenings in that area. The Native Americans talked about other shapeshifters in that area. I don't know if that has anything to do with that girl's sighting or not. I just thought it was worth mentioning. Story 3. Predator in Oklahoma. February 2016. I heard my dog barking and growling at around 3 a.m. one night. I got up and went to the back door to see what she was barking at. When I did, I saw her running up and down the backyard fence line, barking, growling, and urinating all over the fence, with her tail tucked in. My first thought was, there was a predator nearby. I knew something was wrong. I focused my eyes to see if I could see what she was barking at and whispered, "Holy shit." I saw something bent over, in a circle that was black and looked like it had a mane, like a lion. I looked at it for about 15 seconds and decided to run to the bedroom and get my head wrapped light. I put it on my head and ran to the back den and saw that it was still there. I carefully turned on the light and shined it right on it. When I did that, it turned around and looked right in my direction. Then it ran down the fence line with a smaller one in front of it. The best way I can describe it would be to say that it was the size of a lion. It had yellow eyes, pointed ears, huge shoulders, and a humongous chest. It ran on all fours. Also, this thing was so fast that it only took about 2 seconds to run down the entirety of the fence line. This wolf was way faster than my dog. I woke up my wife and told her what had just happened. I then went to the computer and Googled huge wolves in America. Under images, I found a cartoon of a drawing someone had did, and its head and mane looked just like what I saw. It was called the Dogman. Story 4. It happened in Cleveland. June 2000. I had been up all night at a friend's house in the town of Tribby playing video games. I didn't want to sleep there, so I said goodbye and headed home. I knew my car was making a funny noise, but I thought surely I could get home. Well, I was driving down a long, dark stretch of highway with nothing but forest and a few sparse country houses. I was coming up to the top of a long hill when suddenly my car stops pulling forward. The engine revved, but no gears would engage. My CV joint just went out. I was hoping that wouldn't happen. Well, I had no way of getting it home, so I backed up down the road in neutral and off onto a side road. I thought about staying and sleeping in the car, but something told me not to do that. I had an eerie feeling of being watched, so I grabbed my video game case and my machete that I had made from a lawnmower blade and started walking. I kept noticing the feeling of being watched, and it felt like I was being followed. I kept looking behind me and saw nothing, but when a car passed by, heading in the direction behind me, it illuminated the area with its headlights, and I saw something behind me, in the ditch, hunched down low. It was huge, and I could tell it looked animal, but had definite humanoid features. It seemed to have arms, but its head was mostly canine. Its head was very large, and its eyes glowed red when the lights hit them. Well, I've seen enough werewolf movies to know that this wasn't a good situation, so I started running. That probably wasn't the best choice, because I know that predators like to chase things that run from them. When the car had passed, the creature had darted into the trees. I thought that was the best time to run, so I did. I ran for about a quarter mile, and looked back but didn't see a thing, so I kept walking. Well, I kept checking behind me and off to the side where the tree line was. I knew it was still out there, and probably following me, and yeah, I was afraid, but I was also prepared to defend myself, with my machete if need be. I came up onto another hill and saw a farmhouse off in the distance to my left, down a long dirt driveway. The moon was almost full, and the area around the house was clear, so I could see a guy out there messing with his trucks as I walked by. Then he turned on a spotlight on his truck and spotted me with it. I kept walking because his property said no trespassing, and many out there wouldn't hesitate to unload on a strange trespasser. I knew it was close again, probably closer now, and I was about to turn around and face it when another car came over the top of the hill and passed me, going behind me again. I followed with my eyes and noticed this time it was a cop, so thinking quickly, I dropped my machete on the edge of the grass and waved. As he passed, his lights hit the ditch as well, and I saw the Dogman was very close, but it darted into the trees yet again. Thankfully, a moment later the cop stopped and turned around. He came back and asked me what I was doing out there, so I told him what happened with my car. I didn't mention the Dogman though. He may have thought I was crazy, but I asked him for a ride home. He agreed after wanting to go check and make sure my car wasn't blocking the road. After we checked it, he agreed to take me home. I don't know what might have happened that night if he hadn't shown up, and it was the only time I was genuinely happy to see a police officer. Story 5. Dogman in Kansas. Early 2000s. If you know anything about Kansas, you'll know it's dry, flat, and void of much forestry. As a kid, I lived on a farm in the middle of nowhere. I remember that we had our own play set outside, complete with swings and monkey bars. Nearby was a large patch of overgrown weeds, almost as tall as 6 feet in some places. I hated playing at the play set, because sometimes, around sunset, I'd see red eyes from within the weed patch. I told my grandparents, but they dismissed it as coyotes. However, one day, I wanted answers and I approached the weeds. Upon closer inspection, I saw a creature that looked similar to a dog with shaggy white fur. I remembered that I thought its front paws looked like that of a gorilla's. The creature moved away from me and I never saw it in that weed patch again. A year later, I saw the same figure lurking in the dark outside of the house. I was so paranoid my mother could not get me to leave the house for a long time, except for only going to school. I haven't seen this humanoid since, nor am I completely sure if it's the fabled Dogman. Story 6. It appeared in the night. Summer of 2016. I was driving home doing some shopping in a nearby town and was all alone just driving and listening to the radio. It was just before sunset on a beautiful summer day. I was admiring the sky because it was such a bright orange. While driving through some S-curves in the road, I made the first turn and saw some deer dart across the road. Immediately, I hit the brakes to slow down, not knowing if there were more to come out of the woods. On the opposite side of the road, it drops down a steep embankment to a farm field. I had slowed the car down and scanned the tree line for more deer, and that's when this thing jumped out of the woods running after the deer. He landed in the middle of the road and cleared the rest of the road in his next stride alone. It's so hard to comprehend what I saw, but it sounds like the descriptions that people have claimed. It was a gray figure with a short, sleek coat. I did not see a tail on this creature. It was on all fours and was the same height as a deer. His head, though, was very odd. It looked like a dog head with cropped pointed ears, but had a very short muzzle. He briefly turned his head towards me when he crossed, and his eyes, I wouldn't say they glowed, but they weren't normal animal eyes. They were like a dull yellow, and they definitely stood out. His body was what really confused me, because the way it moved was like a human would when trying to run on all fours. Its gait looked lazy, like he was just kind of loping across the road. It was very muscular on the front end, but had a very thin, almost sickly looking abdominal area and hind legs. Once he was across the road, I lost sight of him over the embankment. I was so confused as to what I saw that I didn't tell anyone right away for fear that they would think I was crazy. I had been searching for answers since then, but came up with nothing. I eventually told my husband and one close friend, but neither of them had heard anything that matched my description. I'm still not 100% sure that I saw a Dogman, but it's the only thing I have come across that sounds reasonably close to what I had seen. Story 7. The Beast of Jackson County. September 13th, 2013. Before I say anything about my encounter, I'd been studying wolves and their behavior for about 3 years before I had this encounter, and I know that considering Jackson County is about 656 square miles with a population of roughly 675,000, and it being practically infested with wildlife such as deer, livestock, and predators such as coyotes and foxes, it wouldn't be likely for a large predator such as a wolf to be lurking in the sparse woodlands. The average wolf territory is 13 to 2,400 square miles, and it'd be easy for such a huge creature to just live in the Jackson County alone. This may even be the very same dog-wolf-man thing that other people had seen. Anyway, on to the encounter. I was just chilling on the laptop in the living room, watching people blow stuff up, when I felt like I had to go to the bathroom. I set the laptop down and put my headphones on the keyboard and got out of the chair. Let me clarify, I'm not a bloody psychic or a medium or anything, but I have a sort of sixth sense where I can tell if something is watching me, and I knew something was. We have a huge window on the wall just above the couch, and it was a particularly cold night, so the windows caught things like breath fairly well. I turned to the window, thinking that whatever it was watching me from there, and I knew I'd see it if it was, and it'd have to be either standing on something or tall as the devil himself in order to see into the window of our trailer, since it was around 8 feet off the ground, with the top of it being about 11 feet. I looked over to see the window, and the only thing I could see was the floodlights were on, and something seemed to duck under the window, like a kid playing hide and seek. I didn't think anything of it, considering our neighbors were sort of druggies and alcoholics and often came to look in our windows, and every opening to the house was also locked, so I had nothing to worry about. I went to the bathroom, and when I finished I washed my hands and went back to the laptop. I noticed that the floodlights went out, so whatever it was gone. Not thinking anything else of it, I went back to watching people blow stuff up on YouTube. I should mention also that my eyes are sharp enough to spot a bird at about 50 feet away in a tree, so it's no surprise that when the floodlights came back on, I noticed immediately. I glanced up from the screen, expecting a drunken or high idiot to be looking in with a stupid expression on his face, but I was frozen by what I saw. It was a huge wolf that was looking at me with dirty, ambery yellow eyes. Its ears looked like they were torn or cropped or something, and the face looked sort of human-like. Not really a full human face, but more like the jawline looked very masculine and human compared to the rest of its face. Its lips were curled back, and it seemed as if it were snarling, though I couldn't hear if it was, and its breath caught on the cold glass. It was so tall that the top of its head was halfway up the window, and if I had to guess how wide it was, I'd probably say maybe the width of my shoulders. I knew that whatever it was most likely had to have wolfish instincts, so I did the only thing I knew to do, which was avoid eye contact and make yourself look as small as you could whilst having your throat and underside showing. This is a very common submissive position, and although I was scared out of my mind, I knew that holding eye contact would make me seem like a challenger, and running would make me seem like prey. When I did the submissive position, it must have worked for it to leave me alone because it just hit the window, which made the entire trailer shake, and it went away. I hadn't heard or seen anything else since, though I do hear the odd howl coming from the back roads. God help the poor idiot that decides to try and hunt this thing down. I can tell you now that whatever it was not friendly, because if it were, it wouldn't have slammed my window as hard as it had, and it would not have been growling like I'd taken its food. Although it practically did assault my window, I could understand why it was upset. I was on its territory, after all, an intruder and possibly a threat to its existence and its prey. It's really just best to stay out of its way and respect it. After all, it is one of God's many strange creatures in this world. Story 8. Stay out of the woods. June 6th, 2015. Since it was summer break for my school, I was lazily lounging at home watching TV. I got bored, so I went outside to see if I could do anything with my chickens, like feed them worms and snails. Before I go into more detail, I should explain the area I live in. My home is on the outskirts of the city I live in. I had about 5 or 7 chickens at the time, and we hadn't expanded the coop, so it was a small pen connecting to 2 sides of the chicken coop, which is wooden and sturdy. The only ways to get into the coop is either through the trap door attached to the big door and the 3 windows. One window is on one side of the door, and the second window is on the other side. The third window is a large window. Keep in mind that they all have traps connected to them so they can be closed. We have 7 acres of woodland that we call the back pasture, and if you've ever been back there, you could see that it's a popular habitat for the local deer. There was also a wild boar that was roaming around at the time, and I don't know how it got there. We had been having trouble with poachers for quite a while, considering the population of deer in the woods. One poacher had set up a trail cam, one that was motion activated. There was an old rusty deer stand that had been put on a tree a long time ago, and the tree had begun to grow around it. Beyond our acres of woods, there's a large cornfield owned by our neighbors, and beyond that is a forest. I don't know what the forest is like beyond the field since we've never been there. I went outside to do something with my chickens, and I had brought along a bucket of corn for feeding the deer after. When I walked out of my home, I saw a doe was sitting in the tall grass. I thought it was sleeping since its head had been down and wasn't moving. I, being the curious little nut I was, decided that I would sneak up on the deer and get a picture of it to show my mother when she got home from work. I crept as silently as I could across the yard that separated me from the deer. I should also mention that we have a clearing with a burn pit in it that was filled with cedar branches. I was creeping across my yard towards the deer, and when I had cleared the burn pit and was about 10 yards from it, I realized that the deer wasn't asleep, but it was dead. It was the most disgusting sight I'd ever seen. Its intestines were completely gone, the flesh on the body of the doe shredded to pieces, and blood absolutely everywhere. It looked as if it had been sitting there for a while, and it smelt like it too. Most of the blood was dried, and the air reeked with the stench of rotting flesh, urine, and what seemed to be like a hint of wet dog. Something that creeped me out about the scene was, although it was a rotting carcass, there were no insects at all around it. It was as if the usual lively forest was deader than the deer. Not even the neighbor's cattle made a sound. It looked as if the poor deer had simply been left after being brutally attacked and half-eaten, which it most likely was. I left the bucket at the beginning of the trail, thinking that I would come out later with my mother and grain the deer when she got home. Then, I started to walk back to the house. I had barely taken a few steps when I heard a low, snarling growl that sounded like a wolf. Although it seemed distorted as if it were being played on an old radio, against my better judgment, I turned my head around and I saw what looked like the biggest freaking werewolf you'd ever seen. It was on all fours. Its fur was black and matted in places. Its face was what you'd expect a wolf to look like, although it was broad and the muzzle seemed a little short. Although the way it was curling its lips made it look as if its snout was plenty long and its eyes were yellow. Not a bright yellow like the yellow of a flower or the sun, but a dim, amber, dark red yellow, if that makes sense. Its ears looked like that of a Doberman pincer, with a cropped effect. Its front legs were long, and it looked as if it were a bodybuilder. Its paws, if you can even call them paws, looked like huge hands with long claws at the end of them. It stood up, and I heard the most sickening popping sound you could ever imagine. It sounded like the sound of popping joints, but it seemed amplified as if it were being played through a microphone, and the sound was coming out of a loudspeaker. Its body looked like a bodybuilder's pumped up on steroids. It was so big. It had no tail that I could tell, and it seemed to tower over me. Although I was a good 10 meters from it, I was about 5 foot 4 inches at the time, and I came nowhere close to its height. It was so tall that the tip of its ears could almost touch the top of a young cedar. It let out a loud howl, which sounded more like a roar, and it charged me. Doing the only thing I knew to do while hyped up on fear and adrenaline, I began to run away from it. I remember clearing my yard in what seemed like hours, but was most likely only a few seconds, and running inside, slamming and locking all the doors and windows. As I calmed down a small bit, I had realized that if it had really wanted to kill me, that it would have. That what I had experienced was not an attack charge, but a bluff. I was lucky to get away with my life. Although this happened almost 2 years ago, it still terrifies me to think about it. The deer was gone the next day, and ever since that evening, I have been weary around the woods, only going in them in broad daylight, only when I absolutely had to, and never without a weapon. Sadly, I cannot say that I am one of those people that have stopped experiencing things after the encounter, although I only had nightmares for a month after that day in June. Nothing really started to happen again until about 2 months ago when I was staying up at night playing on the laptop. I had started to hear things moving around on the porch and turned on the light to see the shape of something huge disappearing behind the corner of my house. There was also one of the rare times I went to the woods after the first encounter when I was helping my mother clear brush from the hunting clearing. I was going to get the mower and was walking the trail to do so when I heard bipedal footsteps following me off to my side. They stopped whenever I stopped, and I eventually ran out of the woods, and I haven't been back since. I asked my late grandmother about the creature I had seen in the woods, and she informed me that there was something called the wolf-head man that stalked the Kansa tribe, preying on small children that strayed too far from their teepees. Later, I was informed by my history teacher that my house had actually been built on a tribal burial ground, and I have since been wondering that if that had anything to do with it. I hadn't heard about the wolf-head man before she had told me about it. When I saw that there were several eyewitness reports that were proved to be truthful, it made me feel a lot better about coming out with this information. I had an attempt to tell people previous to this submission, but everyone either said I was stupid, crazy, or just a plain lying. One thing's for certain, I'm not stupid, I am not crazy, and I am most definitely not a liar. I know what I saw, and what I saw was a dogman. Story 9. Dogman, not Bigfoot. 2013. I wasn't there, but my son-in-law, and their friends saw a dogman. My son called me all freaked out that they had seen a Bigfoot because he knows I believe in Bigfoots. Now, my son always made fun of me for believing in Bigfoots. He asked me, "Dad, can Bigfoots run on all fours?" I said, "Yes, why do you ask?" And he said, "Dad, we just saw one out spotlighting rabbits." I asked him to describe what it looked like, and he said they were hunting rabbits with a spotlight, and he saw something hunched over. He said he then yelled to the others and let them know that he had seen something, and then started to shine his light on it. At first, he thought it was a large bird because it was down like it was eating something. Then, it stood up on its hind legs and spread its arms out wide, and then when the other two came to look at it, it dropped down and took off faster than anything they had ever seen before. He said it had a dog's snout and was covered in fur, but you could see it was very muscular. Now, my son is 6'2", and he felt it stood as tall or taller than him. When it took off, they ran after it and watched it jump and clear a huge rock pile in one leap, like nothing. That scared them, and they all ran back to their car to get out of there. I spoke to all three, and they had the same story and described it the same way. I told my son that that's not a Bigfoot, because Bigfoots don't have dog snouts. I told him, "You saw a dogman." It's funny that this happened around a lot of cornfields. The area also had caves and was covered in sagebrush. Story 10. I saw it in Idaho Falls. My name is Angela. I am a 47-year-old female from Idaho Falls, Idaho. I grew up in Idaho, and I am an avid animal lover, especially wolves since I was very young. I am writing to tell you about my dogman encounter when I was around 16 or 17 years old. This would have been right around 1986 or 1987. Anyway, myself, my friend, and my other friend decided one night to go into our local cemetery and look for what is called the knocking grave and the werewolf grave. We found the knocking grave and discovered that it is just a loose board which vibrates back when you knock on the grave. We never found the werewolf grave, so we just chalked it up as being a myth. We decided to go back to the car, and we were talking when my friends A and B decided they wanted some alone time. They were a couple at the time. I got out of the car and decided to walk around the cemetery by myself. It was a beautiful night with a full moon shining above. Ironic, I know. I was walking along looking at the old gravestones and thinking of how sad it is that so many people are completely forgotten after they die, when I heard a strange sound to my left. I was standing near a mausoleum, looking down into another part of the cemetery. I heard the sound again and started walking towards it. It sounded as though something was crunching on something. I stood there for a minute listening. I immediately noticed how quiet it had gotten in the cemetery, and the hair stood up on my neck and arms. Usually, there is noise from cars or dogs barking or crickets or something like that, but there was nothing. I then saw a silhouette of something big and black standing a little ways away from me, around 25 feet away to be exact. Something told me to back away slowly and leave now, but I ignored it. I crept closer to the creature, never taking my eyes off of it. My eyes had adjusted to the darkness, and I could see very well, especially with the moonlight helping light up the night. What I saw terrified me, and also piqued my curiosity. The creature first looked like a huge wolf, but the front legs and torso were abnormally large and the back legs were huge as well. It had a long furry tail behind it just like a wolf's tail. The head was huge and it had long pointed ears with tufts of fur at the tips. From what I could see, it was leaning down and was eating something. The sounds I had heard was the crunching it made when it bit into whatever it was eating. I was excited because I had always wanted to see a wild wolf, and I thought that was what I was looking at. I figured that maybe a wolf had escaped the zoo, which was right next door to the cemetery, and had caught a rabbit or something. I realized though that the zoo didn't have a wolf in it and hadn't had one for years. That made me even more excited and curious. I stared at this creature for about a minute or so, and then I shifted my legs to get more comfortable, and I must have stepped on a twig or scuffled my feet because the creature suddenly stopped eating, looked up, and turned its head my way. It then stood up on its back legs, and I heard a loud pop, and that is when I realized that this was not a huge wolf. It was black and had a few brownish streaks in its fur. When it stood up, I saw its head, chest, stomach, and lower body. The shoulders and chest were massive and covered in fur that tapered down as you looked at the stomach area and legs. It reminded me of a bodybuilder on steroids because of how muscular it was. As it stood there, it started to sniff the air and it stopped and stared my way. The eyes were a deep orange gold and seemed to glow in the moonlight. It looked at me and I felt a fear grow deep within me that I had never felt before. I knew it saw me, and I knew I had made a huge mistake by not leaving when I first got that bad feeling. It felt as though everything went cold, and this creature could see within my soul. It stared at me for a minute, and then it opened its mouth and it bared its teeth at me, as if it were smiling. The teeth were huge and yellowish white, and they looked very sharp, just right for ripping its prey apart. It never took its eyes off of me. It then lifted its arm and took a bite out of whatever it was eating. I then realized the sound I had heard was it crunching bone and tearing flesh as it ate its meal. The hands were like elongated paws, and at the end of each finger were huge black claws that gripped the leg it was eating. I stood there watching it eat for what seemed like hours when it could have only been a few moments. He never took his eyes off me. The fear I felt overwhelmed me. I felt sick, and I was visibly shaking, and so I did the one thing I had been taught to never do when confronted with a predator. I turned and I ran as fast as I could back to that car. I didn't care. I couldn't get his eyes out of my head, and that smile, those teeth. I could just imagine it catching me and ripping me to shreds as I ran. I made it to the car though, flung open the door and jumped in screaming for both of my friends to start the car and get us the hell out of there. They asked me what was wrong, and I just yelled at them to go, now. They both looked at me and saw the terrified look on my face, so they started up the car and we left, and I never went back to that cemetery again. Later that night, I told both of my friends what I had seen, and they both just laughed at me and told me it was just my mind playing tricks on me, which made me feel hurt that they didn't believe me, but I could hardly believe it myself. I saw a werewolf, or what is referred to as a dogman, and I will never forget it. Please, if you're listening to this, don't ever traverse through the Idaho Falls Cemetery. Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoy my content, be sure to subscribe for more true and scary encounters with Dogman, Bigfoot, and all other sorts of creepy, hairy creatures and cryptids, and more. Don't forget to snag yourself a shirt or a really cool coffee mug from our Teespring online store. Stay tuned, we have all sorts of cool new videos coming your way.